Well, Emily Maitlis, co-host of Global's podcast News Agents, is here. Well, I mean, he's taken his opportunity, hasn't he, to put the boot in there?
I do think he makes a good point, though, actually. I mean, a leopard doesn't really change its spots. And, you know, if you're our age, you've lived through 3 Mandelson resignations already. And all of them were of a very similar ilk. It was all about money, loans, and that proximity to power.
Yeah.
It was wanting to live a lifestyle that you couldn't afford without somebody else's help, essentially. And I think that in terms of whether it sort of reflects badly on Starmer, look, there's no question it was a mistake to appoint him, and there were plenty of people around him who were telling him it was a mistake. And I can't help feeling that you put a few more women in your circle of advisors, you know, sort of sharp ears, who would be able to say, honestly, you don't need to look very far to get a nasty feeling of this. There is a nasty smell to all this. Like, don't do it. Don't start trying to appease Trump at this point. That's not what this is about. Just go with your gut feeling of what is right, and that didn't happen. But I think the extent of what happened was, of what we now know, and these are obviously allegations at the moment, and they are, you know, there are no charges, there are no convictions, but the extent of what we've now learned is so beyond anyone's imagination. I mean, this is, I would say, probably one of the biggest political corruption scandals we've ever seen in our lifetime.
Well, Keir Starmer described it in the cabinet meeting this morning as gobsmacking.
Yeah, I mean, if this were somebody operating within a company, you'd call it insider trading. Within a government, what does that look like? I mean, I want to reach for a word that sounds more like treason, right? Because this was, and you provided some of that context just before to your
I'm worried about
listener.
using the word traitor, but I can't see any way around it.
I think it's slightly, I mean, now even traitor is a sort of thing of fun, but there is something of the panto villain in all this, isn't there? You know, that at the heart of the financial crash, when the country was on its knees, when the economy was on its knees, when we were trying desperately to work out this country's way forward through the financial crash, Peter Mandelson was, according to these emails, and if they are proved to be right, he was forwarding highly confidential government information within seconds to somebody who was not working with our country's interests at
While
heart.
people like my previous caller, James, were trying not to go bankrupt.
That's the point. So do you remember what it felt like? The visceral hatred, frankly, of the banks and bankers, and Fred Goodwin was being pursued for his role in the RBS and the collapse. Alistair Darling had literally become a bank manager. He'd nationalised the banks, you know. So we were sitting there going, how on earth did the banks land us in this absolutely terrifying, terrible mess?
And Peter Mandelson's helping them out over the phone.
And Peter Mandelson is trying to make sure that bankers' bonuses aren't cut too much, you know, and it comes on top of other things, that 500 billion euro bailout. Why was Epstein told about that before we were?
The shape of our economy generally.
Resignation. Why was Epstein told about that before we were? The tunnels, the secret tunnels that lead through passages in bits of our government. Why was Epstein told about that before people in the country were? That's the bit that sort of, honestly,
sticks in the craw.
It beggars belief, doesn't it?
It does. I got some breaking news here that I know you'll be interested in. Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, formerly Prince Andrew, has been reported to the police following allegations he was involved in trafficking a woman to the UK for sex. It is alleged that Andrew was involved in bringing the woman to the UK for the purposes of sexual exploitation in 2010. After the latest release of the Epstein files, as you'll know this, a second woman came forward alleging that she was sent to the UK by the convicted sex offender and financier. That is a big move. It's a big moment. We had Prince Edward earlier today saying we can't forget the victims in all of this. Your thoughts after that breaking news?
The speed at which things are happening now is quite something, isn't it? I mean, this morning we had Starmer Cabinet Office reporting those Mandelson files, essentially, to the police. We've had news that Keir Starmer wants to strip Mandelson of his title, his peerage, as quickly as possible. Now we've had Andrew essentially being investigated by the police. Now, when he sat down with me, Sheila, that was more than 6 years ago. So in a way, you're kind of thinking, what took you so long?
Yeah.
Like, why have we been here for this long? But it feels like what is happening now is that evidence is coming from the Epstein files, from corroborated testimony, from witnesses, one of whom I don't think we'd heard of before. And I guess it is becoming harder to ignore the sort of the massive evidence now in terms of what the police should be doing.
It won't surprise you the campaign group Republic made the report to the police, which they obviously have to respond to.
So, yeah, I mean, look, Republic is a Republican group, an anti-monarchy group who think that, we'd be better off without the monarchy. So I guess in a way you have to say, well, they would do that, wouldn't they? It is in their interests of the campaign to think that the country would be better off without a monarchy. But I think there will be a lot of people who don't necessarily sit on the Republican side, but still think that actually,
that's appropriate.
Well, they want justice to be done, right? And we haven't mentioned the victims in this yet, but we should, and we need to. And if what this means is that a woman who has put her life on the line, and actually in the case of Virginia Giuffre, that was literally true. Yeah. She's no longer with us. She took her own life in April after a pretty horrendous childhood and much of her adult life as well. If she has put her life on the line to try and see justice being done, and we are perhaps one step closer to seeing justice being done, to an investigation at least, then I don't think that can be a bad thing. I think that is where we should be now.
And I'm conscious as well, I don't know whether you've noticed it, but I'm conscious of the very, the speed with which the energy around the Mandelson corruption story came in a flash. When it comes to women and girls, when there were girls saying I was raped by some of these men, people aren't so keen to really get into the weeds and look at it, are they? It's the politics, yes, but the abuse of victims, allegedly, no.
Look, it won't surprise you to know that I was up until about 2, as I bet you probably were, just going through all the Epstein files. And the FBI testimony is really horrific. Yeah. I mean, it is really horrific. I didn't sleep very much after 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
And what we have to try and explain to people who may be going through the stuff themselves is this is sort of the first time that we are seeing witness statements
about what happened to them and their
about
bodies.
What happened to them and their bodies, and how scared they were, and how threatened they were, and how
powerless in that moment.
Powerless to actually even to leave, because quite often they were threatened with people saying, we know where you live, we'll come and get you, we can end your life. So we are reading those testaments for the first time, and obviously there'll be some people who say, oh well, how do we know it wasn't made up? How do we know it wasn't consensual? How do we know that if they were being paid,
she went there, didn't she?
She went there, didn't she?
Yeah.
And as ever with sexual crime, it is so much harder to prove than the stuff that has a clear email trail to it, which can be corroborated, not least in the Chancellor's own memoirs, which some of the Mandelson stuff is.
And in the case of Peter Mandelson, your own private email in BlackBerry, it turns out.
Literally, you're doing it on your BT, email yourself. But what I would say is, if the release of the Epstein files now starts a conversation and makes us relook at some of the FBI witness statements and say, do you know what? I don't think those were taken seriously 20 years ago, but they can be taken seriously now, and we should still be taking them seriously. We should start looking at these with fresh eyes and saying, right, who is still out there that we need to talk to, that we need to investigate.
Justice in whatever form that comes.
Absolutely right.
Because the legal jeopardy is probably passed for some people, but not all by any means.
I don't think so. I mean, well, it depends. I mean, as an outside reader, I'm seeing names in there who I know have denied wrongdoing, and I know who have told us that they've broken up all further contact with Epstein, who clearly didn't, who clearly went back.
One particular one that we know of, Prince Andrew said it, didn't he?
Well, Andrew has been proven to have lied. Yeah. But honestly, Sheila, last night I found 5 more men who had all said that they had broken off any contact with Epstein and clearly hadn't. And many of them have denied wrongdoing, and I would suggest that there is plenty of room for further investigation into some of those people.
And a brief word on the Clintons before you go.
Well, that's really interesting, because I thought that was going to be today's bombshell. How old-fashioned am I?
I've had 5 bombshells.
Exactly. You just come on air and it all happens. Both Hillary Hillary and Bill have agreed to testify to Congress about the Epstein files. To put this in context, when Bill Clinton was president, he invited Epstein to the White House about 17 times. He went on his plane many times, not ever proven to have been on Epstein Island, and he denies all wrongdoing and all allegations of sexual abuse. So obviously the fact that you appear in the files does not indicate wrongdoings. I'm sure you've said to your listeners like many times already today. But there was a lot of pressure coming on them to testify, and they were resisting it because they thought it was Donald Trump trying to essentially turn the page and change the subject, and they called it lawfare. In other words, he was trying to sort of generate something that felt political to put them on the stand instead of him. And those around them have clearly said, you've got nothing to hide. If you did nothing wrong, you weren't on the island. We know you were on the jet anyway because there were trips to Africa, there were trips, to sort of Clinton sort of causes, if you like, after he left office. The pictures are all there. You might as well have the moral high ground, because if Democrats are going, if former presidents are going, I think it's the first time since Gerald Ford, I want to say like 83, since a former president has gone before Congress to testify. But if they can do it, then they have the power and the high ground to be able to say, right, why aren't you doing it, Trump?
Yeah, or indeed.
Or anyone else.
Here in our country, to Andrew as well. Thank you very much, Emily, host of the Newsagents podcast, co-host, I should say, for the others, for the boys too.